In this lesson, we'll learn how we can add some kind of a photographic background onto our 3ds Max viewport. Alright, so for the next several lessons, we're actually going to be working on compositing this pod racer onto some kind of a photographic background or some kind of a photographic plate. So the first thing we need to do is actually load this plate up into the viewport itself, so that way we can start to match the viewing angle, the distance, and things like that. So within our perspective view, let's go ahead and go to the Smooth Highlights menu. All the way down at the bottom, we can go to Viewport Background and click on the Viewport Background menu, or you can just use the keyboard shortcut, which is going to be Alt-B. Okay, so what we need to do is now define some kind of a background image for this viewport. So let's go into the Files, right? And in your 3ds Max project, if we take a look inside Scene Assets, and take a look inside Images, you should see a file in here called Desert. So let's open this up. Let's go ahead and make sure that we do have the aspect ratio set to match the rendering output. We'll have this set to match the display background so we can actually display this image. Right, let's press OK. And there we are. So now we have this background that's loaded up here in the viewport. So now we can come in and start to match things like the actual angle on this. So scrubbing through our animation. Now we can start to get in here. Zoom in a little bit tighter. And now just start to come in here and play with some of these different angles until we find something that works. Alright, and scrubbing through my timeline, just making sure that my angles aren't too terribly off. So in my case now, as I'm back to the beginning of my timeline, you can see that my pod racer might start off a little bit too high. So I might just swing this camera down. There we go. Try something maybe a little bit more like that. There we are. Maybe get in a little bit tighter over here. And again, just sort of playing with some of these different angles until I find something that works for me. Alright, so for the beginning, or rather the ending part of my animation, I really kind of want this pod racer to come a little bit higher up over the camera. So we kind of end up with something like this. So that way the pod racer seems like it's just barely missing the actual camera. There we are. Now I might need to come in here and actually swing this around a little bit more so that way we can actually see more of the pod in the view itself. There we are. That should work. So once I have this positioning set up and everything is looking pretty good, what we can actually start to do now is create a camera in this position. So right now I am looking through my perspective view. Now if I want to create a camera at this exact position, we can just use the keyboard shortcut, which is Control-C. So press Control-C on my keyboard. It really doesn't look like much as anything has happened, but now if you take a look up here where it previously said perspective, now it says camera 001. So you'll also notice that it might be a little bit more difficult to actually move your camera around, especially when it comes to orbiting around. So at this point, I really don't want my camera to move. So I'm just going to come in and undo a few of my different camera movements. There we are. Now at this point, anytime I want to, I could go back to my perspective view by just pressing the P key on my keyboard. So just come in here, press P. And again, really doesn't look like much as if anything has happened. But now if you take a look up here, we're now looking through the perspective view. So as I start to swing my perspective view around, there we are. And now if you look closely, you can actually see the camera that we created previously. So now I can still come in, start to orbit around my scene. If I want to, I can press the Z key and zoom in on certain objects. Do whatever adjustments I need to. And whenever I want to go back to my camera view, I can just press the C key on my keyboard. So press C, and immediately we jump back to my camera view. Alright, so now while this does look good here in the viewport, one thing that we will notice is that if we were to try to render this particular viewport background actually won't render out. So if I were to render this, just pressing Shift Q on my keyboard, you can see that we do have the pod racer in here just as we should, and at the exact same view that we are actually seeing here in this camera view, but we notice we don't actually see the viewport background itself. So in our next lesson, we'll learn how we can start to render this image-based environment in our actual render.